Welcome to Rising to the Top Lessons in Leadership, brought to you by Columbia University. This is a podcast where we interview senior industry leaders who share the secrets of their success and reveal pivotal moments that impacted their career path. Come listen as they shed light on obstacles they overcame, as well as wins they achieved.
How you set it up, the conversation, or start the conversation can really make a big difference the rest of the conversation. So I always say, using the words we as much as possible instead of, I think a common advice around difficult conversations is use the word I language as much as possible, which is true. Use I. You're not trying to say you do this, you always do this, you mess up. It's also using we, because you want to position yourself together with them as solving the problem. You're not trying to change, you're not trying to solve them as a person. You're trying to ally yourself together so that we can solve this problem together.
Chris Wong is an ICF certified executive coach, licensed therapist, speaker, and podcaster who brings a wealth of experience and expertise to the world of leadership and learning and development in the nonprofit space. He also co-hosts the podcast, The Art and Science of Difficult Conversations, where he helps people master difficult conversations in all domains of their lives. Today, we're very fortunate to have with us Chris Wong, owner, executive coach, consultant of Leadership Potential. Chris, thanks so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
And so we're going to try something a little bit different on the podcast today. We're going to talk a little bit about your background and how you ended up starting your own business and Leadership Potential. But then after that, we're gonna segue into asking you some questions related to having difficult conversations, since that's what a lot of what you do with your work. And the questions that we have been shared with us from staff at Columbia and students. So I think a good place to start, Chris, would be if you could give us a little bit of your background and how you end up forming Leadership Potential as your own business.
Yeah. So I got my start as a licensed therapist, and I was working with adolescents. And so when I first graduated, I started working with adolescents at a residential treatment center. And that's important because the focus there, or the specialty we got, was working with kids who have problem sexual behaviors, so who have either abused someone else, and a lot of them also had their own trauma history. And so this is a really intense topic that not a lot of people like talking about in general. And I didn't grow up talking about difficult conversations, so I was thrown into having really, really complex conversations with people. And I love that work. I loved everything I did, but it's also very draining. It's very stressful, and so I got burned out. And so I transitioned into learning and development because I still loved helping people grow, helping people develop, and from there doing leadership and organizational development. And because I found that I wanted to work on systems, I wanted to help other leaders have these similar hard conversations. And so that's what led me to starting my own company, Leadership Potential. I wanted to help other people have difficult conversations because I was noticing I was helping a lot of leaders and teams just have these conversations because they just weren't able to. And even if it was, I worked in a nonprofit that was behavioral health. So these are people that are almost all of them are trained to have hard conversations, and they still couldn't have them with each other in a work setting or in a large group setting. They were missing these basic principles. And every time I talk to people about this idea, they're like, oh, I need help with that, or everybody needs help with that. And so I saw there was a really big need of how do I help people have these hard conversations at work, in their personal life. And then as leaders, how do you do it so that you can create a culture that works for you? Or when you're new in your organization, how do you build credibility and trust? Because I work with a lot of people, a lot of leaders who are really good at what they do. They have high goals. They want to achieve really well. But then the desire to do a lot of big things prevents them from taking a step back and slowing down and having the necessary conversations to start off good relationships in general.
And how did you actually learn about how to have these conversations? Was some of it by experiencing it yourself? How did you dive deeply into it?
Some of it was experience. Some of it was just the nature of the type of therapy that I was doing, working with complex trauma, working with adolescents who have a hard time talking about feelings. And it was a lot of boys. And so it was just talking through a lot of those things with them and learning how do we have these hard conversations, and then learning that we could do the same thing for um, professional settings, right? Like the same principles apply. Like the content's different for sure, but the same principles apply. And then I was following a lot of really cool podcasts about this topic. Also, Negotiate Anything is one of the ones that I love. Coaching for Leaders, but those are two big podcasts I listened to that really showed me there's a way to use the same skill sets in a professional setting. And so I still do therapy, right? Like now I focus on men who are married men who just are having difficulty communicating, difficulty with their relationships. And I still see the same things as how do I communicate better? How do I create an open channel of communication? How do I share about my feelings when I don't even know what I think I'm feeling? And so how do I access that? And so a lot of it's really the same. It's just the content's a little different, but the same principles all around.
Can you talk about how you went from working for these nonprofits to starting Leadership Potential?
Yeah, so I started off on the side at first. I was just posting. I was just doing webinars on the side while I was working, and then I got laid off. Over time, I got laid off, and so I said, you know what? I love this work that I'm doing. I love working with these leaders. I love having a big impact, and so I decided this is what I want to do. I want to pursue this full time, and so that's when I also found my co-host for my podcast around the same time. She had seen one of my webinars and wanted to collaborate with me on stuff, and I wanted to do a podcast already. So together we were able to figure out how do we create a podcast that tackles this topic and not run out of ideas. Because by myself, that was my problem. By myself, I was like, I have ideas for like 5 episodes and I'm done. I have no idea what else to talk about. But together we were able to take it to the next level, and so we've been able to do it for a little over a year now, and continue to build. So really, the impetus was like getting laid off, but it was something I had started to do on the side already, and so it was just a natural next step for me.
And what types of clients do you serve? So you mentioned that you're doing some of your therapy work. Is that embedded within Leadership Potential, or is that a separate thing that you're doing?
That's a separate thing, mainly because it's just a very highly regulated field doing therapy, and there's a lot of ethics around dual relationships, things like that. So I keep it separate, but I will say that their skill sets are still the same. Like I bring a lot of coaching skill sets into therapy and therapy skill sets into coaching, and I think it makes me better in both settings. And so the clients I work with tend to be senior leaders, executive level leaders, and it's really across. I've been fortunate to work across lots of industries like healthcare, biopharm, nonprofits, university, higher ed. I've been able to work with a lot of different things, I think, because my focus is always how do you have these conversations, navigate difficult relationships with people. And the people thing is always going to be the same. Somebody doesn't want to do work. Somebody's not on board with change, so they want to stick to the old ways. Or people aren't doing their job, so you need to somehow get them to do their job, even if they're volunteers. Like if they're a board of directors, they're all volunteers. So how do you get them to do what you need them to do? Even though like they're not getting paid, so you can't really necessarily. There's less options for holding them accountable. You still can, but there's less options available.
Can you talk a little bit about your podcast, The Art and Science of Difficult Conversations? Where did that idea come from? And, what are you hoping to do with the podcast?
My co-host and I started it because originally our original idea was we wanted to have role plays for clients. We wanted to show them this is how you have this type of conversation, or you can have this type of conversation. And we wanted to put it behind a paywall. The reality was it was a lot more complicated to think about that process to put it behind a paywall. And really, at the end of the day, we just wanted to help people get better at difficult conversations. And so we said, let's just make a podcast. It'll be free for everybody. And we focus on all sorts of difficult conversations, personal and professional. So we've talked about weight loss. We've talked about trauma. We've talked about managing up. We've talked about, lots of different work situations like managing large teams, transitioning from military to civilian leadership. And we like to have a mix. So we'll have episodes where it's just me and her, and we'll talk about a specific topic or a specific strategy, and then we'll role play how does it look like to use that strategy or have that conversation. And then we'll interview guests and talk about how did they get better at the specific skill of this type of conversation or talking about this thing, but really trying to analyze what are the specific skill sets you need to get better or overcome that fear of difficult conversations. And I think later this year we want to start having more live call-in shows and creating a community where people can actually ask, I have this specific conversation coming up. What can I say? And then we can just dissect it live and talk about it and give ideas. But I think that's really the hard part about any difficult conversations course or podcast or anything like that is if you have a difficult conversation, you need help today about it. You don't need help like 6 months from now when you finish a course. Like you have a conversation with your boss tomorrow, or you have a conversation with an employee today, or you need to talk to your partner about something important tomorrow. You don't have time to wait like another 6 months to think about how to have that conversation. So we want to get better at how do we meet your needs in the moment as opposed to waiting a long time.
Do you find that, regardless of whether the difficult conversation is happening at work or it's happening outside of work, like with a family or friends, some other relationship that you have, are the ways that you would approach these difficult conversations, like is there a framework or like a place that you would suggest that people start to think about how to have these conversations?
That's actually why I created my own framework around it, because it's just helpful to organize it. So I call it the trust framework. And it's not anything super special. That's why I don't like necessarily advertise it. But it's just the first thing everybody needs to think about is what's the goal of the conversation. And I think that's the step that a lot of people miss out on is what is the goal of the conversation? And it's got to be some measurable outcome that I want out of it. Not that I need you to do something differently, but what am I getting out of this conversation? And then from there, it's a lot of preparation. It's thinking through what am I thinking about, reframing how I'm even going into the conversation. I was speaking to a client last week who swore in the middle of a conversation with somebody because after talking about it, he realized he went into the conversation already angry at this person or annoyed. And so, of course, the person said something that he expected they would say that would upset them. And he ended up just swearing. And he was like, I need to get better control of this. It's not professional. And luckily, that other person, they have a good relationship, so she wasn't stressed out by him swearing. But he knew that it would, put a good, or it would really impact how other people see him if other people were in that meeting, right? So it's reframing just an idea. How do you even go into this conversation? What are you thinking about? What are your emotions going into it? And understanding what are the other person's communication style. Do they need time to think through the conversation? Do they think out loud? Like I'm an external processor, so I'll talk and talk, and it sounds like I'm disagreeing, but I'm really just thinking through in my head out loud all the different aspects. Whereas some people, they want to think about it, they want to sit quietly and alone, have that alone time to do that raw introspection about what they think about it. But the more you know about that, then the more you can give that time, or you can not take what they're saying at face value. You can wait for them to think through it out loud, but thinking through that. And then there's a way to organize the actual flow of the conversation so that you can even move the conversation forward while keeping it focused and not getting tangents or not letting people throw you off by being angry at you or crying or even lying if you're trying to bring up some facts or something. But that's the way I think about it, is that preparation is so key. And that's why I spend a lot of time thinking about, like, what are you even doing before you go into that conversation? And then there's skill sets within the actual conversation to move things along, to essentially help them feel at ease and comfortable, so they don't feel like they're on the defensive the whole time.
When you're going into that preparation, are you also trying to anticipate how whatever you're going to say is going to be received by or should you be anticipating how potentially what you're going to share is going to be received by the other person?
Absolutely. You should be thinking about how you're saying it. And I always advise everybody that I ever work with is practice saying what you're going to say out loud, because just thinking about it is different. Like thinking about it is okay to start, but once you say it out loud, it feels different. You're processing it differently, and you realize, wait, that doesn't sound right, or I'm saying this word, I'm repeating this word a lot. That's not going to help. So saying it out loud is helpful. Practicing with somebody, but also having somebody pretend to be that person, and the idea of role play, but have them come up with this is how I think the other person's going to react. I want you to push back, or I want you to cry. I want you to yell at me. I want you to do something, because I need to think about how I'm going to respond before I get into that moment.
What's a common mistake that people make when approaching these hard conversations, and how can they try and avoid those?
I think that common mistake is not knowing what your real goal is, and thinking that you're combining a couple of different goals. Like if you've upset me, like we work together and you did something that upset me, and I need to have this conversation with you, do I want to just vent at you? Do I just want to yell at you and get things off my chest? Or do I need you to do something different? Those are actually two different conversations. And if I try to do them both at the same time, if I'm just yelling at you, vent, you're just going to be defensive. You're not going to change. You're not going to want to change anything. You're not going to listen to what I'm saying. Right? That's a different type of conversation. If I need to vent at you, that's not going to be very effective in the long run for what you want to do. But if your goal is I just want to get this off my chest and yell at you, and I don't care if you do anything differently, then I guess that's fine. But if you want behavior change, if I need you to do something different, I'm going to need to vent to my friend, and then I'm going to need to come to you and talk to you about how you're talking about me in the meetings and how it's disrespectful. And I want to make sure that we have a different way of interacting, or I need you to say something different or refer to me in a different way, because that's not, whatever we're doing right now is not working.
So some of it you have to kind of process and decide how you're feeling about it, maybe separately from, or deciding what the conversation is that you're going to be having when you go in, like focusing on the one thing rather than multiple things.
Exactly. And the more you can stay focused on that one thing, the easier it is to also keep it on track. Right? Because if you go in knowing exactly, if I'm your boss, right, I need to talk to you about being late, then you might throw out other things to deflect me or distract me from you being late. I can stay on task. If I remember, I'm just talking to you about this one thing, you being late.
So let's say in that scenario, you're talking to someone about being late or not getting a project done or whatever it is, where you're kind of trying to course correct. You bring this up, you're talking to the person gets defensive about what they're hearing. Maybe they come up with, it doesn't necessarily have to be an excuse, but a response to what you're saying. And maybe there's some feelings that are being shared there, right? Like they're being either being defensive, or they feel hurt in some way. How do you, as the person who's having this difficult conversation, how do you keep it moving along and acknowledge how they're feeling as well?
So there's a few different ways to think about it. I would think about how do you even prevent that. I call it prevention, but it's really more how do you minimize the chances of that happening. And so even at the beginning of the relationship, beginning of the conversation, I'll have talked about this is the goal of the conversation, and these are the ground rules. And if I suspect that you are a person that's going to be defensive, I'll probably share that in the ground rules. Like, hey, if you're feeling some sort of way, I want you to feel free to say, let's take a break, or let's stop for a minute. And we'll come up with whatever ground rules we agree with, but it's set up in there that we're going to be able to have this conversation and stay on track. In the moment, if you're defensive, there's a few different ways you can go. You can just reflect how they're feeling or what you're noticing. Like, hey, I'm noticing you're feeling some sort of way as I bring this up. What's going on? What are you feeling? What's going on for you here? It's a bit of a choose your own adventure, but you're essentially, the goal is how do you help them calm down that emotion so that they're not feeling the need to fight you or run away from that conversation.
So I just wanted to segue to having a couple of asking a couple of questions related to work. But let's say you're having a conflict with your direct supervisor at your workplace. How would you suggest that someone go ahead and address that, keeping in mind that there's certain power dynamics and the fact that they're being managed or supervised by this person that they're having the conflict with?
The hard part is, what is the conflict itself? Is it a conflict about a difference in what priorities of the work you're thinking about, or is it a different work style altogether, like they're micromanaging you versus you need more independence, or vice versa, you want more micromanagement, you want more direction, and they're way too hands off, and you need a little bit more direction. So partially that's the hard part of that question. Is so broad about what type of conflict. But I could say, like, that's the first step, is figuring out what is it that you need from your supervisor. Do you need them to be less overbearing, more overbearing? Do you need them to be better at prioritizing tasks or prioritizing time or whatever it is you need to figure out first. What is it you need from your supervisor? Then I always suggest you need to think about, like I said, you need to understand that person. Like, what are their priorities? What's their communication style? Are they more direct or indirect? Do they like talking about sports or the weekend or, your favorite ice cream flavor? Or are they really like, let's get down to business. I don't care about your personal life. I don't want to share my personal life. Let's just talk about this. Are there times of days or weeks of days where they feel better? What's their priorities and their motivations at work? Are they just trying to get by and just do what they got to do to coast till retirement? Or are they trying to grow? They're trying to get to that next level, so they're trying to look good. Whatever it is, you're trying to get them wins. You're trying to get them, especially if you're managing up, it's all about how do you help them look good and also make their job easier because when you're a manager also, like, the reality is you're juggling so many different things and people are coming to you with things that go wrong. So it's really how do you help them win at what they're doing and do a good job. So that's a lot of the first step, and when you're having that makes the conversation itself easier, is thinking through what do you need from them, what are your ideas to think through that, and how do you facilitate that conversation. Who knows them really well? One tactic I've used a lot really well, and I've helped a lot of other people think through, is who knows your boss really well and can give you insight into their own style if you can't figure it out, right? So if you're my coworker but you've been on the team longer than I have and you have a good relationship with our boss, I'm going to go to you and say, I can't figure out Patty. I can't figure out what her style is. What is your sense? How have you been able to work well with her?
I was wondering if you could talk, Chris, about how to approach working with a team member that's not pulling their weight.
I looked at that question and I chuckled to myself when I saw the prep because I've done a few different like alumni events, like talking to students, and that was like the second most asked question is, how do I deal with this team member on this group project that won't do their part of the work? Number one, I think part of it is how do you set up the structure from the beginning to get their buy-in? So I said in the beginning, you should have you should, but the best practice is set up times to keep meeting with that person frequently to check in about this project, even if it's like just 5 minutes. Let's do a 5-minute phone call. Let me just see what's going on. What you want to do is you're trying to create familiarity so that they trust you and they like you. You want to be a person that they want to help, essentially. And so having these check-ins that are not onerous, you're not trying to overburden them with like lots of different like 2 hour long meetings every week. You just want to do a check-in. I just want to check in so that we're on the same page of what's happening, right? And then what I call heartbeat meetings, so that you are on the same page with each other of what's happening. And then from there, you'll have to figure out how do you have that conversation ahead of time. Like, what happens if you aren't able to meet this deadline? What do you want to do? Or what happens if things get busy? And that's my favorite question. What do you want to do if we can't meet this deadline, or if you can't meet this deadline? And it's not saying the attitude should not be, I think you're going to mess up, or I think you're not going to do well. It's really, I understand that things get busy. You might have a death in the family. You might have lots of other things on your plate. What do you want to do? How do you want to set this up so that we can get our stuff done? Right. And understanding their priorities. What are their priorities? Like, maybe they don't really, like, if it's a classwork, maybe they don't really care about this class. They're like, I just need to pass the bare minimum. So set up at the beginning, what do we need to do to just pass for you? And like, I want to high achieve, but we still need to do something, right? We still need to, what can we do that gets both, so that you can just pass, you can do what you got to do to get through this course, and at the same time I can still put in a good effort or a good project that I can still get a good decent grade on.
What can you do if you're trying to have a conversation and you feel like you're not being heard in a work scenario?
Yeah, I would define for myself, what does being heard look like? What does it look like to be heard or feel like? Because I think that's an important factor, is because, again, some people's style might be they can't do eye contact. They just can't look at you, or they're just quiet because they're an internal processor. They need to think through things. And for some people, without that eye contact, without you actively saying things out loud, you might suddenly think they're not listening to you. So I think part of that is defining what that looks like, and understanding like other people might have a different communication style from you. And it may look like they're not listening to you, but they might be, and they just are processing the information differently. And that's an important distinction to note. But if they are not, like, let's say they're actively ignoring you, they're like saying all that stuff. Again, part of that is that beginning of that conversation, is how you set it up, the conversation, or start the conversation can really make a big difference the rest of the conversation. So I always say, using the words "we" as much as possible instead of, I think a common conversation or what's it called? Advice around difficult conversations is use the word "I" language as much as possible, which is true. Use "I." You're not trying to say you do this, you always do this, you mess up. It's also using "we," because you want to position yourself together with them as solving the problem. You're not trying to change, you're not trying to solve them as a person. You're trying to ally yourself together so that we can solve this problem together. So the more you can do that, the more you can put them at ease and make them feel like they're an equal part of the conversation, the more you're able to get them to buy into the conversation. And so, I teach a flow to the conversation. It's asking their permission to go from step to the step from the conversation. So like, you introduce the topic, you ask, is it okay if we talk about ground rules? You talk about ground rules where it's you're giving them permission to interrupt you, or giving them permission to stop you or take a break. You ask permission for them to move on to, let's talk about the rest of the conversation. Is that okay with you? The more you do that, the more you're empowering them every step of the way so that they feel a part of the conversation. Because I think sometimes if they're not listening to you, they don't feel empowered in the conversation, or they just don't feel like you're hearing them out. So a lot of the things you can do within the conversation can help lift them up a little bit so that they feel an active part, feel like they're being listened to, feel like they're being heard, and they can listen to you as well.
What's best practice for what to do in those types of situations where the person is starting to either get upset with you or they're just unresponsive to the message that you're sharing?
Yeah, I'll give you a choose your own adventure, and you can these a few different things you can do, and you can use them by themselves or you can use them separately or together. I mean, you can combine them either way. You can reflect what you're noticing. Like, I think I mentioned that before. You can just reflect, say, "Hey, it looks like you're feeling upset by what we're talking about." You can say that. You could say, "I'm noticing this." You could ask a question like, "What's different for you?" or "What's coming up for you as we talk about this?" You can summarize. You could say, "Listen, can I just summarize? Let me just stop here. I just want to summarize where we've been, because we've talked about a lot. We've talked about this, and you shared that you were feeling this way and you wanted to do this, and I shared that I was doing this, and then you share that, and then you said that it seems like it could be a good idea." Right? Or you could just be silent. I think sometimes it's also, you could just be silent, not say anything, and let the air hang and just be there. And you can use any of those by themselves or together. I love using the summaries because you can pick and choose what you remember from the conversation, so you can actually guide the conversation a little bit in the direction you want it to go. Or sometimes I'll just reflect and say, "Hey, it looks like something is really coming up for you right here." And then I just won't say anything. I just give them space to respond. And they might say something, they might say nothing, but I'll just continue to stay silent. I won't say anything, because eventually they'll need to say something to fill up that space, right? And so that gives them the opportunity to share, and it's so uncomfortable that they'll eventually share. And for people who don't do it very often, it feels uncomfortable to suddenly not say anything. You feel like you have to say something in response, especially if they say, if they directly call you out or directly say something at you, you'll feel like you have to say something, but you don't have to. You can just be silent.
Thank you for listening to Rising to the Top Lessons in Leadership. For more episodes, subscribe on Spotify, SoundCloud, or Apple Podcasts. To get more information and tips on how you can advance your career, visit Columbia University's Career Design Lab at careerdesignlab.sps.columbia.edu. Please take a moment to fill out our survey to tell us what you think about the podcast. Thank you to Peter Shea for sound editing this episode.